Jeff Kinney's book, The Diary of a Wimpy Kid, was read over 20 million times upon its first release. It was a New York Times bestseller, won several major awards, and was translated into 45 languages. Now it exists in another, unlikely language, Latin.
The story is exactly the same as the original book, which has captured the hearts of so many, not just young readers, but also adults. And it was basically decided that because the book had become in a very short time a classic, that at least in the publisher's mind it should be also offered in a classical language like Latin. So a very modern book, a story of a junior high school or middle high school aged boy, and told in a Latin which is both traditionally classical but also very new in much of the vocabulary that had to be used to tell the story.
Rendering a book like this into what some call a dead language has its challenges and requires special creativity.
In some cases, it wasn't possible, and the experience that I had in trying to come up with a joke, especially idiomatic jokes like a knock-knock joke or something like that, we had to completely change it. And in fact, we used on one occasion a very well-known and traditional Latin joke, which plays on the first word. It's an alliteration with M, so it's mori, mari, meri, and it goes on with all these four-letter combinations. And most Latin readers who are in the Latin world will recognize the joke right away.
Monsignor Gallagher had the chance to give the first of 200 copies of a limited edition to Pope Francis himself.
Pope Francis was very happy to receive the book. He was not familiar, as far as I could tell, with the story, as far as he had told me when I presented it to him. So when I told Pope Francis the story of conversion that takes place in this book, he was very interested, and I could tell he was interested to read the story. He was excited that it existed in Latin. He's a great supporter of Latin, obviously, as the head of the church whose official language is Latin. And he also has a personal interest in education and making sure that young people learn well and learn Latin well. And I told him immediately that the initiative to produce this book was primarily to help children and young people to learn Latin. Because in learning Latin, they become better human beings, and they learn virtue, they learn discipline, and the book was geared toward that kind of an audience.
By translating it, Latin was revived and came back to life, since new words had to be invented.
I can think of times when I had to come up with a term that didn't exist, surprisingly, because the Latin vocabulary is already so rich, even with modern terms. And I remember, for example, there was no prior word for heavy metal music, this subgenre of rock music. And the genre of rock music has had a Latin expression for a while, this musica vertendo et notando, meaning to basically roll and to rock is the two motions. And but there was no term for heavy metal music, and so I discussed it with friends and people who were really into contemporary Latin. And in the end, it was just best to come up with something like musica metallica gravis, which is a literal translation, because even the English is not intuitive as far as what the meaning is. It seems to apply well to this kind of music, so why not just use more or less a transliteration, more or less what we would call a transliteration of the English. So things like that were fun.
The book will be released in English-speaking nations in August and can be bought in shops and online.